The day I turned 18, I was handed a key to a place I'd never seen and told it was worthless. A quarter-acre of scrubland in the West Virginia mountains. A rotting cabin nobody had stepped inside in over a decade. Back taxes due in 90 days. Sign the waiver, take the $200, and disappear. That was the advice. From the caseworker, from my roommate, from the lawyer who couldn't be bothered to look up from his desk. They were all saying the same thing, let it go. But the key was heavy in my hand, heavier than anything I'd ever owned, which wasn't much. I was 18 years old with a duffel bag, $73, and a story I'd been telling myself for 12 years, that my grandmother had dropped me at a county building and never looked back. That I wasn't worth keeping. That key was the only thing she ever gave me. So I didn't sign anything. I got on a bus to a town called Hollow Ridge, and I walked 3 miles down a dirt road to a ruin everyone had already written off. What I found sealed in that cellar didn't just change my life. It set the record straight on everything I thought I knew about where I came from, and it put a target on my back the size of a $2 billion IPO. This is that story. The morning I turned 18, the sky over Cedar Brook was the color of old dishwater. Not dramatic, not symbolic, just gray and indifferent the way the sky had always been over that place, as if the weather itself had grown tired of trying. I had been awake since 4, not from excitement, not from the kind of restless anticipation that birthdays are supposed to carry. I was awake because I had learned somewhere around age 9 that the hours before dawn were the only truly quiet hours in a home that housed 43 children and ran on fluorescent light and institutional routine. I used those hours the way other people use prayer. Lying on my back, staring at the water stain on the ceiling above my bunk, I would take inventory of myself. What I knew, what I didn't, what I was going to do when the day finally came. The day had come. My name is Wren Calloway, and on the morning of my 18th birthday, the sum total of my worldly possessions fit inside a canvas duffel bag that had once belonged to a boy named Marcus, who aged out 2 years before me and left it under his bunk like a gift or an apology. 2 changes of clothes, a paperback with a broken spine, a pair of work boots barely held together that I had found in the donation bin and repaired myself with electrical tape, and $73 in small bills folded and tucked into the inner pocket of my jacket, earned from odd jobs over the past year. Raking leaves, stacking shelves at George Petty's hardware store on weekends when the staff let me tag along. Shoveling snow off Mrs. Alderman's driveway 3 blocks from the facility for $5 a session. $73, 18 years. I had done the math. It came out to roughly $4 per year of being alive. I got up before the wake-up bell, dressed in the dark, so as not to disturb Jessie, who was still asleep in the bunk below me, with her arm thrown over her face, the way she always slept, like she was blocking out a light only she could see. Jessie was 16. She had 2 more years. I had watched girls leave this place, and I had watched girls come back broken in different ways than when they left. And I had promised myself I would not be one of the ones who came back. I sat on the edge of my stripped bunk and waited for the bell. When it came, the day moved with the mechanical efficiency that Cedar Brook ran on. Breakfast in the dining hall. The usual noise. The younger kids who didn't know what day it was or didn't care. The older ones who did know gave me the kind of nods that pass for ceremony in a place without ceremony. Jessie hugged me too hard at the table and told me not to forget her when I was famous. I told her I would write. We both knew I probably wouldn't. Not because I didn't care, but because the way this place worked, leaving meant leaving. You didn't get to carry pieces of it with you. You just carried the weight of it, and that was different. At 8:30, Mrs. Harmon's assistant came to the dining hall door and said my name. I picked up my duffel bag, and I followed her. Mrs. Harmon's office smelled the way it had always smelled. Lemon cleaning solution and old paper and something underneath both of those things that I had never been able to name, but which I associated deeply and permanently with the feeling of being evaluated, of being found wanting. Her desk was wide and gray and spotless, and she sat behind it the way a judge sits behind a bench, with the particular stillness of someone who has delivered verdicts so many times that the act has become as routine as breathing. She was not a cruel woman. I want to be clear about that. She was efficient. She was organized. She ran Cedarbrook the way a machine runs with minimal waste and maximum throughput, and the children who passed through her facility were in her framework a kind of throughput. Processed, assessed, discharged. She was not unkind to me. She was also not kind. She existed in the wide gray space between those two things, and that space I had come to understand was its own kind of damage. She slid an envelope across the desk without preamble. "Happy birthday, Wren," she said. "As of today, you are an adult in the eyes of the state of Virginia. You are no longer a ward of this facility." I looked at the envelope. It was thin. Standard manila, the clasp slightly bent. My name was typed on the front in the facility's standard font. Cedarbrook used the same font for everything. Birthday notices, disciplinary reports, discharge papers, the font of institutional indifference. "There's a voucher inside for a bus ticket," Mrs. Harmon continued, "and the contact information for the Transitional Housing Coordinator in Richmond. I'd encourage you to call that number today. Placements fill quickly." I reached for the envelope. It was heavier than I expected. I opened the clasp. Inside the bus voucher and the housing coordinator's card was a second, smaller envelope sealed. Cream-colored paper. My name written on the front in handwriting I had never seen before. Below my name in smaller letters, "To be opened on your 18th birthday. Per the instructions of Ruth Eleanor Calloway, deceased." I looked up. Mrs. Harmon was watching me with the careful neutrality of someone who already knew what was in the envelope and had already decided how she felt about it. "Your grandmother," she said. "She passed away in the spring of 2022. You were 16. We were notified as the facility of record, but as she had specified in her legal documents that you not be informed until you reached adulthood, we honored that instruction." She paused. "The estate was handled by a probate attorney. There is a property involved. The details are inside." I stared at the cream envelope in my hands. My grandmother, Ruth Calloway. I had 3 memories of her. The smell of wood smoke and something sweet like dried apples. The feeling of large, rough hands on my face, cupping my cheeks, a gesture so deliberate it felt like she was memorizing me. And a sound, a low humming sound, not quite a song that I had spent 12 years trying to reconstruct in my head and never quite managing. And then nothing. A county building. A woman in a blue jacket who smelled like hand sanitizer. A room with a mural of cartoon animals on the wall. And the beginning of a story I had been telling myself ever since. The story went like this: my grandmother had left me because I was not worth keeping. It was not a story anyone had told me directly. No one had sat me down and said those words. But the story lived in the silences, in the way caseworkers would pause before answering questions about my family, in the careful, rehearsed language of every adult who had ever discussed my circumstances with me. Your grandmother was unable to provide adequate care. Family reunification was not possible in this case. You have a fresh start ahead of you, Rin. The story was built from the architecture of those silences, brick by brick, over 12 years, until it was the most solid thing I owned. I opened the cream envelope. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. A property deed printed on official county letterhead. Lot 7, Briarley Road, Hollow Ridge, West Virginia. A 1/4 acre of land and a structure described as a single-story residential dwelling. Below the deed, a handwritten note from an attorney named Aldous Merritt, brief and businesslike: Miss Calloway, the attached property was held in trust for you per your grandmother's instructions. Property taxes are in arrears. The total outstanding balance is $487. The county has issued a 90-day notice before the property reverts to public auction. Please contact my office at your earliest convenience. 90 days. And there was one more thing in the envelope. I felt it before I saw it, a weight in the bottom corner. I tilted the envelope, and it slid out into my palm. A key. Iron. Old. Heavier than it had any right to be for its size. The shaft was worn smooth, the teeth filed by hand rather than machine, each one slightly different, the work of someone who knew what they were doing with metal. The bow at the top was shaped in a simple oval, but someone had scratched something into the surface of it. Small letters worn almost flat with age. I tilted it toward the light. C.G. Calloway Ground. I did not know why I thought that. I did not know if that was even what the letter stood for. But the thought arrived fully formed and settled into my chest like something finding its way home. Mrs. Harmon cleared her throat. The attorney's assessment is that the property has negligible market value, she said. The structure has not been inhabited in over a decade and is likely unsound. The land itself is undeveloped scrubland. Given the tax liability and the cost of any necessary remediation, the most practical course of action would be to sign the attached waiver and allow the estate to be discharged. You would receive the residual value after administrative costs. It would not be a large sum, but combined with the transitional housing resources and your bus voucher, it would give you a reasonable starting point. She slid a second form across the desk. Clean white paper. A signature line at the bottom. I looked at the waiver, then at the key in my hand, then at the waiver again. Where is Hollow Ridge? I asked. A small pause. West Virginia, rural, several hours by bus. Is there a bus that goes there? Another pause, slightly longer. There is a regional line that stops in the nearest town. She folded her hands on the desk. Rin, this is a practical matter. The property is worth very little. The cost of getting there, the time involved, the legal complexity of contesting the tax status, none of it is commensurate with any realistic return. I am not telling you what to do. I am telling you what I would advise any young woman in your position. I'm not signing the waiver, I said. I said it quietly, without heat. The way you say something, you have already decided, not something you are deciding in the moment. Mrs. Harmon looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded once, the way she nodded at things that were outside her control, and therefore outside her concern. She pulled the waiver back across the desk. She made a note in a folder. She stood, which was her way of ending meetings. Your discharge paperwork is at the front desk, she said. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to vacate the premises. The transitional housing coordinator's number is in your envelope. I would still encourage you to call. I stood. I picked up my duffel bag. I put the key in the inside pocket of my jacket next to the $73 where I could feel its weight against my ribs. Thank you, I said. Not for anything specific, just because it was the last thing I was ever going to say to her, and I wanted it to be something. She did not respond. She was already looking at the next folder on her desk. I walked out. Jessie was waiting in the hallway. She had been crying, which she would deny for the rest of her life if I ever brought it up. She grabbed me by both arms and looked at my face the way you look at someone when you are trying to memorize them, and I thought of my grandmother's hands cupping my cheeks, and I had to look away. You got something? Jessie asked. She had seen the envelope. A piece of land in West Virginia, I said. Land like a house, like a ruin. She processed this. How much is it worth? Not much. You signing it over? No. She stared at me. Wren, come on. Take whatever cash they're offering and come to Richmond with me. Tamara said the housing coordinator there is actually decent. We could get a place together maybe once we're both. Jessie. She stopped. All right, I said. She let go of my arms. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, which was the Jessie equivalent of composing herself. You better, she said. And when you're living in some falling down shack in the middle of nowhere, you better remember I told you so. I smiled. It was the realest smile I had produced in a long time. Then I picked up my duffel bag and I walked out of Cedarbrook Home for Youth for the last time, and I did not look back because there was nothing behind me worth the weight of the glance. The bus ride took most of the day. I changed twice. Once in Charlottesville, once in a small depot outside of Beckley that smelled like diesel fuel and old coffee. The landscape changed with each leg of the journey, the flat, managed green of central Virginia, giving way to something older and harder. The Appalachians don't announce themselves politely. They rise up out of the earth with the particular authority of things that have been there long enough not to need to explain themselves. By the time the bus wound through the last stretch of two-lane highway before Hollow Ridge, the mountains were pressing in on both sides of the road, like walls covered in the dense dark green of late summer oak and pine, and the sky above was a narrow blue stripe, and everything felt smaller and larger at the same time. I had never been anywhere like this. I had grown up inside fences, literal and otherwise, and the openness here, even the compressed openness of a mountain valley, was something my nervous system did not quite know how to process. I kept expecting a wall to appear, a boundary, something to tell me where I was allowed to be. The bus stopped in front of a building that served as the town's general store post office and apparently also its bus terminal, judging by the handwritten sign taped to the door. One pump gas station across the gravel lot. A white clapboard church on a low hill to the north with a bell tower that leaned slightly east. a scattering of houses visible down the main road. And then the road curved, and the houses ended, and there was just the valley and the mountains and the trees. Hollow Ridge, West Virginia. I stepped off the bus with my duffel bag and stood in the parking lot and breathed the air, which was different from any air I had breathed before. Cooler than it had a right to be for August. Damp with the smell of pine resin and creek water, and something mineral underneath it all. Something that came from the earth itself, from whatever the mountains were made of. The bus pulled away. I was alone. I went inside the general store. A bell above the door. Wood floors worn pale with decades of boots. A smell of coffee and motor oil and something baking sweet and faint. The aisles were narrow and crowded with everything a person might need if they lived far from anywhere. Canned goods and rope and seed packets and work gloves and 3 different kinds of oil for 3 different kinds of engine. A hand-lettered sign above the register said, "Cash preferred. Card accepted. No checks since 2019. Behind the counter, a man. He was in his mid-60s, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of permanent lean that comes from decades of bending over things. Gray hair, not the soft gray of age, but the hard gray of weathered metal. A beard cropped close. Hands that were doing something with a piece of machinery on the counter, some kind of small motor disassembled into its component parts. Each piece laid out with the precision of a man who had spent a lifetime treating small things with large amounts of care. He looked up when I came in. The look was brief and complete, the kind of inventory a person takes when they have lived in a small place long enough to know every face in it, and an unfamiliar one requires a full accounting. "Help you," he said. His voice was low, a mountain voice, not unfriendly, but not warm, positioned somewhere in the neutral territory between the two, waiting for information before committing to either. I put my duffel bag down and pulled out the deed. "I'm looking for a property," I said. "Lot 7 Briarley Road. It belonged to Ruth Calloway." The change in the man was immediate and subtle, not dramatic. He did not flinch or step back or change his expression in any obvious way, but the motion of his hands stopped. The motor part he had been holding was set down on the counter with a care that had something deliberate in it, the kind of care that gives you a moment to decide what to do next. His eyes came back to my face, and the quality of the look shifted from inventory to something else. Something more considered. "Ruth's Place," he said. The name in his mouth had texture, like he was saying something that had been sitting in a particular spot for a long time and had left a mark. "Yes, sir." "You her kin, her granddaughter." A long pause. Not hostile, not welcoming, just the silence of a man recalibrating something internal. "Garrett Briggs," he said finally. He did not offer his hand, but the name was offered in the same spirit. An exchange of information, an acknowledgement. "Wren Calloway." He looked at me for another moment, then he pointed to the window. "Briarley Road. Take the main road south, about 2 miles, until you see the old water tower with the dent in it, left at the gravel fork. Follow it another mile until the road goes dirt. Mailbox at the end of a path left side. Can't see the house from the road. It's set back." "How long a walk?" "From here, 40 minutes, maybe more with a bag." I thanked him. I bought a bottle of water and a bag of trail mix and a flashlight with 2 batteries. I had thought to bring one, but it was cheap, and the beam had been dying since Charlottesville. The new one was solid rubberized, the kind that suggested it had been designed for people who took darkness seriously. As I was paying, Garrett Briggs looked at the flashlight on the counter and then at my face, and for a moment I thought he was going to say something else, something that wasn't directions. But he just counted out my change and laid it on the counter between us. And when I picked it up, our eyes met briefly, and I saw something in his that I didn't have language for yet, but would later understand was the particular expression of a man who has watched something bad happen and has lived with the shape of it for a long time. I picked up my duffel bag and I walked out. The walk was long. The main road was paved but narrow-shouldered on both sides by tree lines so close the branches interlocked overhead in places and turned the road into a tunnel of green. The air was cooler under the canopy. A creek ran somewhere off to my left, audible but invisible, making its argument in the dark beneath the roots. I passed 2 houses, both set far back from the road, both with the particular hunkered-down quality of structures that have survived a lot of winters and are not making any promises about surviving more. I found the water tower with the dent. I found the gravel fork. I followed it to the dirt road, which was less a road than a record of previous passage, 2 shallow ruts in the earth with grass growing high in the center strip. And at the end of it, half swallowed by a stand of overgrown lilac that had gone wild and woody with neglect, a mailbox. It was rusted to the color of dried blood. The red flag was gone, snapped off at some point, leaving just the metal stub. On the side, barely legible under the rust, a single letter had been hand-painted in black C. Callaway. There was a path beyond the mailbox. Calling it a path was generous. It was more of an intention, a suggestion that someone had once walked this way repeatedly enough to leave a trace, and that the woods had been spending the intervening years quietly reclaiming it. I pushed aside a branch of old lilac, dense and dry, and stepped into the shade of the trees. And after about 100 yards, the trees opened. The clearing was small, maybe half an acre circular, in the way that clearings in old forests are circular, as if the trees had stepped back by agreement. The light came in from above late afternoon gold, soft and thick, and it fell on the most desolate thing I had ever seen. It had been a house. It still was in the way that a skeleton is still the shape of a person. The bones were there. A square footprint of roughly 400 square feet, maybe a little more. Walls of rough-cut timber, the wood gone the dark silver gray of old barns, dried beyond the point where rot takes hold, preserved by the dry mountain air, into something harder and more austere than decay. The porch was still standing, though one of the support posts had given way, and the right corner sagged toward the ground, giving the whole front of the house the expression of something mid-shrug. The roof had been built with a steep pitch, sensible for heavy snow, but the center ridge had bowed under the weight of years, and the middle section dipped in a way that suggested the rafters underneath had finally negotiated a settlement with gravity. The windows were boarded, every one of them, not haphazardly, not with whatever was at hand, but with a deliberateness that I noticed even through the shock of the sight. The boards were cut to fit nailed at regular intervals. Someone had done this with intention. Someone had closed this house on purpose and with care. Weeds had come, thistle and sumac and wild grape and a low-spreading plant I didn't know the name of had grown up around the foundation and across the porch steps and along the path to the front door, and the effect was of a house being slowly, patiently consumed by the hillside it sat on. I set my duffel bag down in the weeds. I stood there in the late afternoon light, and I felt the weight of the journey, all of it, not just the bus ride, but the 12 years settle into my legs and my chest and the back of my throat. They were right. Mrs. Harmon, Jesse, the attorney Aldous Merritt, with his brief businesslike note. They had all been right. This was not a house. This was not a home. This was the last joke in a very long story, and I was standing at the punchline alone in a clearing in the West Virginia mountains with $73 in my pocket and a duffel bag I had inherited from a boy who didn't bother to take it with him when he left. I let myself feel it for exactly 1 minute. I had learned this somewhere in the middle years at Cedar Brook, that grief needs a container. You give it a minute, a real minute, and then you close the container and you move. I moved. I picked up my duffel bag and I circled the house. The back was the same as the front. Same weathered wood, same boarded windows, same accumulated testimony of years without care. There was evidence of what might have once been a kitchen garden, the raised bed borders still faintly visible under the weeds and the ghost of a footpath between them and a small outbuilding about 30 feet from the back of the house that was more collapsed than standing, its roof having finally surrendered to the inevitable sometime in the last several winters. And then I saw it. It was in the northeast corner of the property, where the clearing met the tree line, and a stand of old cedar grew close enough to the foundation to have sent roots under it. The undergrowth there was thick, denser than anywhere else around the house, as if the plants had been specifically encouraged to grow in that spot, or at least not discouraged. I pushed through the cedar branches. The smell of them was sharp and clean, the turpentine smell of old-growth cedar, and it cut through the general smell of rust and old wood and damp earth that had followed me around the property. Under the branches, pressed close to the stone foundation of the house, was a door. Not the front door, not a window, a cellar door. It was set at a low angle against the foundation, almost horizontal, framed in timber that had been chosen and fitted with a care different from the rough-cut walls above it. The planks of the door itself were thick, maybe 3 inches, the kind of thickness you use when you are building something to last, something to resist. They had darkened with age and moisture, but had not rotted, and I understood why a moment later, when I ran my hand along the surface and felt it, the wood had been treated, oiled regularly for years. Someone had been taking care of this door, even while the house above it fell into disrepair. In the center of the door was a lock plate. Hammered iron oval, fitted with a precision that was out of place here too, careful, too specific. In the center of the lock plate was a keyhole. Not a modern keyhole, a traditional keyhole, the kind made for a key that was cut and filed by hand. I took the iron key out of my jacket. My hand was steady. I am not sure why. The rest of me was not steady. My heartbeat was in my ears, and my throat felt tight, and the light was failing fast as the sun dropped behind the western ridge, and the clearing was going gold, and then amber, and then the deep, attentive gray of mountain dusk. But my hand was steady. I put the key in the lock. It resisted, not from rust, The resistance was the smooth, specific resistance of a mechanism that has not been operated in a long time, but has been kept in working order. The internal components still aligned, still capable, just reluctant from disuse. I applied pressure. Slow, even pressure, the kind you use on old things that deserve respect. The lock turned. The sound it made was not a click. It was deeper than that. A low, heavy thunk, the sound of engineered metal doing what it was made to do. The sound of a mechanism built for this specific purpose, fulfilling it finally after years of waiting. The sound echoed off the stone foundation and the cedar trunks and disappeared into the trees. The door swung up. Cool air came out of the opening. Not cold, not dank. Cool, dry almost. The smell was old earth and stone, and the particular smell of enclosed space that has been stable for a long time, like the inside of a well-made box. It was not the smell of rot or neglect. It was the smell of preservation. The stone steps went down into total darkness. I turned on my flashlight. The beam went down the steps and illuminated a packed earth floor at the bottom, roughly 8 feet below. The walls were fitted stone laid without mortar in the old style, each stone chosen for its flatness and dressed to fit the joints tight enough to have held for decades. The ceiling was low. I would have to duck at the bottom. The space was small, maybe 12 feet square, and in the center of the floor, sitting on a low platform of fitted stone like an altar, was a trunk. It was large, the kind called a steamer trunk, though this one had never been on a steamer. It was made of wood walnut, I thought, though I wasn't certain, banded with iron at the corners, and along the lid, the hardware the same hammered style as the lock plate on the door. The iron had oxidized to a deep matte brown, the color of autumn leaves after the first rain. The wood was dark and smooth. The trunk was not in a state of neglect. It was in a state of care. Someone had oiled this wood. Someone had maintained this iron. The same person who had oiled the door. I went down the steps one at a time, keeping my left hand on the stone wall. At the bottom, I straightened as much as the ceiling allowed. I walked to the trunk and crouched in front of it and set the flashlight on the stone platform beside it, angled so the beam lit the front of the trunk without blinding me. There was a latch. A simple iron bar latch secured with a small padlock. The padlock was different from the door lock, smaller, the kind used for luggage or diaries. And taped to the top of the trunk with tape that had yellowed and dried and lost most of its adhesion over the years was a small key. Small enough to be a diary key. Small enough to have been waiting here in the dark for someone specific. I peeled the tape carefully, and the key came free. I inserted it into the padlock. It turned without resistance. I lifted the latch. I took hold of the lid with both hands. I lifted. The hinges moved without protest. Someone had oiled those too. Inside the trunk, laid on a bed of cream-colored linen that had gone faintly yellow with age, were 3 things. 12 envelopes bundled together with a blue ribbon, each one numbered in sequence in the same handwriting I had seen on the cream envelope in Mrs. Harmon's office. The handwriting was distinctive, and I would learn to recognize it anywhere, the particular slant and pressure of a left-handed person writing with deliberate care, each letter formed as if it mattered. A bundle of paper tubes sealed at each end with wax, 4 of them, the kind used for storing rolled documents. the kind that keeps paper flat and dry for decades if the seal holds. And money. Old bills banded in groups, the bands faded but intact. I did not count it then. I just saw it, the depth of it, more cash than I had ever seen in one place. On top of all of it, placed precisely in the center of the stack of envelopes, as if it were a letter of introduction, was a single envelope unsealed. On the front, in the same left-handed script, was my name. Not Miss Calloway. Not Wren Calloway. Just Wren. My hands were shaking now. I lifted the envelope. I removed the letter. 3 pages, both sides, the lines close together, the handwriting steady and deliberate throughout, even on the last page, even at the very end. The voice of a woman who had known exactly what she was saying and had wanted every word to count. I angled it toward the flashlight, and I read, "My dearest Wren, if you are reading this, you found the key. If you found the key, you got on the bus instead of signing the paper. If you got on the bus, then you are the person I always believed you were, and everything I did was worth doing. I need to tell you something first before anything else, before the land and the money and the names of the people who will try to take it from you. I need to tell you this first because I know what story you have been telling yourself for 12 years. And I know how solid that story has become, and I need to break it before it breaks you. I did not leave you. I know you believe that I did. I know it is the only explanation that has ever made sense to you. But it is not the truth, and you deserve the truth, even if it is harder to carry than the story you have been living with. In the spring of 2012, a man came to this house. His name was Royce Dunham. He worked for a company called Hargrove Land Group, and he had been coming to this house for 2 years by then, sometimes politely, sometimes not asking me to sell this land. I had refused every time. The first time he came, he offered me money. The second time, more money. By the third time, the offers had stopped and something else had started. Small things at first. My fences cut, my mail tampered with, a fire in the field that might have been natural and might not have been. But in the spring of 2012, Royce Dunham came to my door, and he did not make an offer. He stood on my porch, and he looked through the screen door at you playing on the floor behind me, and he said, "It's a dangerous world out there for a woman raising a granddaughter alone. Accidents happen." He said it pleasantly. He said it the way you say the weather is looking changeable. And then he turned and walked back to his car and drove away. I stood there for a long time after that. I thought about what I had. I thought about what I could fight and what I couldn't. I thought about you. I made a choice that has cost me every day since. I called your mother's county services worker. I told her I could not adequately care for you. I said the words that I knew would mean you would go into the system, and I said them clearly, so there would be no mistake and no delay. And then I watched a woman in a blue jacket put you in a car, and I did not run after it, and I have not slept a full night since. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to understand. There is a difference. The land is worth more than anyone has told you. Your great-grandfather Thomas knew what was under it. I have kept his secret and his records, and now they are yours. There are men who want this land badly enough to have spent a decade waiting for you to turn 18 and sign a piece of paper and disappear. Do not sign anything. Do not speak to anyone from Hargrove Land Group. In this trunk is everything you will need. The money is yours. The records are yours. The land is yours. Be stubborn, Wren. You come from stubborn people. It is the best thing we have ever been. All my love for every day of 12 years, Ruth. I read the letter twice, then a third time. I sat on the cold, packed earth floor of that cellar with my back against the fitted stone wall and the flashlight balanced on the trunk beside me. And I read my grandmother's words until I knew every sentence by its shape, until I could feel the rhythm of her handwriting in my hands, the way you feel a song before you can name it. And then I cried. I am not going to describe it in detail because some things are private even in the telling. What I will say is this: I had been carrying a story for 12 years. The story weighed more than the duffel bag. It weighed more than anything I had ever physically lifted. And sitting in that cellar, reading those words, I felt the weight of it leave my body in a way that had no name, only a sensation. The particular lightness of something put down after a very long time. She had not left me. She had saved me, and the cost of saving me had been everything she had, including the years. I stayed in the cellar until the flashlight batteries began to dim. Then I climbed the stone steps, pulled the heavy door shut behind me, turned the iron lock, and stood in the clearing in the full dark of a West Virginia mountain night. The stars here were different from the stars I'd known. There were simply more of them. The sky was dense with them lit from within, and the cedar trees made a dark border against the dark sky. And the silence was so complete, I could hear my own pulse. I went to the porch. I sat on the steps, which held my weight despite their complaints. I opened the duffel bag and found the trail mix in the water, and I ate in the dark, slowly tasting almost nothing. When I was done, I sat for a while longer. I thought about the trunk, about the 12 envelopes, about the document tubes sealed with wax and whatever my great-grandfather Thomas Calloway had recorded inside them, whatever song the rocks under this land had been singing since before anyone alive had been alive to hear it. I thought about the name Hargrove Land Group embossed in the letter I had not yet opened, still sitting in my jacket pocket, where I had put it at the mailbox. I thought about the word Ruth had used. Stubborn. In the morning, I would open the document tubes. I would read the other letters. I would understand what I had and what it meant and who wanted it and why. But right now, in the dark on the sagging porch of the most dilapidated thing I had ever owned, with the mountain silence pressing in on all sides and the stars burning cold overhead, I held the iron key in my fist, and I made a single quiet, unwitnessed decision. I was not going anywhere. The morning came, the way mornings come, in the mountains, not gradually, but all at once, the light arriving like a decision rather than a process. One moment, the clearing was dark. The next, the tree line was lit from behind in a pale gold that turned the dew on every leaf and weed stem into something briefly precious, and the birds started, and the creek sound clarified, and the world declared itself open for business whether you were ready or not. I had slept on the porch. Not well, not badly. The kind of sleep that comes from exhaustion, overruling discomfort, a few hours of something deep and black and dreamless, and then a long stretch of that particular half-consciousness where you are aware of your surroundings without being fully inside your body. I had listened to the mountain dark, the creek, something moving in the tree line, unhurried, unconcerned with me. The slow tick of the cabin settling on its old bones in the cooling night air. I woke with the light and the stiffness of a night on bare wood, and the iron key still in my fist. The first thing I did was go back down to the cellar. I had left the trunk unlocked. I lifted the lid in the early light that came down the stone steps from the open door above, and I took out the 12 envelopes and laid them in order on the stone platform. Then I took out the 4 document tubes carefully and set them beside the envelopes. Then I sat cross-legged on the earthen floor, and I opened envelope number 2. Ruth's handwriting. The same left-handed script. The date at the top was 2013, the year after she had put me in the system. She began by telling me about Thomas Calloway, her father, my great-grandfather. A man she described the way people describe those they have loved longest and known best, with the particular clarity of long familiarity, every detail weighted by memory. He had been born in Hollow Ridge in 1921, the son of a coal miner, and had watched the coal industry take the mountains apart piece by piece throughout his childhood, watched it take men's lungs and men's years, and leave the hillsides looking like something had reached down from the sky and clawed them. He had determined at a young age that he would understand what was in the earth before he let anyone else tell him. He had put himself through West Virginia University on a combination of academic scholarship and summer labor, graduated in 1947 with a degree in geological engineering, and spent the following decade doing survey work for various private concerns throughout the Appalachian region. He was good at it. Ruth said he used to tell her that rock has a voice if you know how to listen, that every formation is a record of time longer than you can hold in your head, and that reading it correctly requires a quality that is rarer than intelligence, which is patience. In 1966, he came home to Hollow Ridge and bought the 1/4 acre on Briarley Road for almost nothing. The land had been considered poor since anyone had memory of it. No good for farming, no coal deposits worth extracting, or at least none that anyone had identified. The previous owners had let it go for a sum that barely covered the filing fees. Thomas built the cabin himself. He laid the foundation stone by stone, dressed each one himself, fitted them without mortar, the way the old-timers had taught him. He dug the cellar by hand and built the door and the lock plate in his own workshop. He planted a kitchen garden and ran a fence line, and for the next 5 years he lived there quietly, and people in town thought he had simply come home to live out a quiet, modest life. What he was actually doing was surveying his own land. Ruth said he never told her exactly when he found it. He never said on this day at this depth, I understood what I was sitting on. He told her gradually in pieces over years, the way you share a secret that you are still deciding how much to trust another person with. But by the time she was a teenager, she understood the substance of it. Under the Calloway ground at a depth that would have been unreachable with mid-century equipment, but was well within the range of modern extraction technology, There was a deposit of lithium-bearing spodumene that her father estimated based on his core samples, and his survey data was one of the largest undiscovered deposits in the eastern United States. Lithium. I had looked it up on my phone on the bus ride after reading the first letter. I had a basic understanding of what it was. A soft, silvery metal, the lightest solid element, critical component in rechargeable battery technology, which meant critical component in every electric vehicle, every laptop, every phone, every grid-scale energy storage system. Global demand had been climbing for decades. Domestic deposits were limited. The industry had been hunting for new sources across the American interior for years. Thomas had known none of this, not in those terms. In 1971, when his surveys were complete, lithium was an industrial chemical with modest commercial applications. He had not buried his research because he understood its future value. He had buried it because he understood what discovery would do to the land. He had watched the coal companies come through Appalachia. He had watched the stripping and the blasting and the slurry ponds and the men with black lungs and the mountains that no longer looked like mountains. He had no interest in being the man who opened that door again. So he recorded everything meticulously, the way a scientist records what a scientist knows must be recorded. And then he locked his records in the cellar he had built for them, and he told no one except his daughter. He died in 1988. He left the land and the cabin and the locked cellar to Ruth. She held the secret for 20 years before anyone else began to suspect it. I sat in the cellar with the letter in my hands and the flashlight on the stone floor beside me, and I thought about Thomas Calloway measuring his land inch by inch, year after year, writing down what he found in a handwriting I had not yet seen, but was about to the patient record of a man who understood something about the relationship between knowledge and power that most people never figure out. Then I opened one of the document tubes. The wax seal cracked cleanly. The paper inside had been rolled with a sheet of acid-free backing someone Thomas or Ruth had known enough to protect it, and it unrolled without cracking. It was a topographic map of the property and the surrounding hillside hand-drawn in pencil, with the precision of professional draftsmanship overlaid with a grid of survey points marked in red ink, each one notated with a code that corresponded to a key at the bottom of the sheet. The key was in Thomas's handwriting. Small, even the handwriting of an engineer. Each code corresponded to a sample type and a depth reading. Across the lowest section of the map, in a band that ran roughly northeast to southwest beneath the property line, the density of sample points tripled. That was where it was. I did not have the technical vocabulary to read every notation on the map, but I understood the shape of the thing. I understood the deliberateness of the documentation. This was not guesswork. This was not the hopeful speculation of a man who wanted to believe his land was worth something. This was a lifetime's professional work applied to one specific question, and the answer was recorded here with the rigor of someone who knew that rigorous answers outlast the people who make them. I put the map carefully back in its tube. I read 3 more of Ruth's letters. By the time I climbed out of the cellar and stood in the clearing with the morning sun fully up and the dew already burning off the weeds, I understood the shape of the last 12 years. Hargrove Land Group had first approached Ruth in 2010. 2 years of offers escalating in value and declining in courtesy. Then The campaign of small menaces. The cut fences and tampered mail and the fire that might have been natural. Then Royce Dunham on her porch in the spring of 2012, looking through the screen door at a 6-year-old girl playing on the floor and making his meaning unmistakably clear. Then silence for a decade. Hargrove had pulled back after Ruth gave me up and disappeared from the property. Ruth's letters described it with the analytical clarity of someone watching a predator from a distance, tracking its behavior, noting the pattern. They had assumed she had broken. They had assumed she would eventually sell, or that the state would seize the land for taxes. They had moved on to other properties in the valley, buying them up one by one quietly using the same graduated playbook. Generous offers first, then pressure, then whatever came after pressure. They were patient. They had been building their position in this valley for over a decade, and the Callaway ground was the last piece they needed. I stood in the clearing, and I looked at the cabin with different eyes than I had looked at it the evening before. The evening before, it had been a ruin. This morning, it was a fortress that had been left untended. Different thing entirely. I picked up my duffel bag, and I walked back to town. Garrett Briggs was behind the counter when I came in the bell above the door announcing me. He was doing the same thing he had been doing the day before, or something very like it. His attention on the disassembled machinery in front of him. But I noticed he looked up faster this time. Not surprised to see me. That was interesting. "Morning," he said. "Morning." I put my list on the counter. I had written it on the back of the trail mix bag with a pen I borrowed from the motel-sized notepad Cedarbrook had given all departing residents as part of their goodbye package, along with a bus voucher and a list of social services phone numbers. Flashlight batteries, a camp lantern, a sleeping bag rated for 40 degrees, a small camp stove and fuel canisters, canned food enough for a week, a heavy-duty padlock, the kind that resists bolt cutters, a crowbar, work gloves, a tarp, duct tape. Garrett read the list without expression. Then he read it again. "Staying a while?" he said. It was not quite a question. "Yes." He began pulling items from the shelves. He worked efficiently without commentary. He knew where everything was without looking. I watched him move through the narrow aisles of his store, and I watched the particular way he handled the items on my list, with the same deliberate care he had given to the motor parts the day before. A man who took small things seriously. When everything was on the counter, he started ringing it up. The total was more than I had. I was doing the math in my head, watching the numbers add up, trying to decide what to leave behind when he stopped. He looked at the total. He looked at me. Something moved across his face, brief and interior. "The padlock and the crowbar," he said. "Consider them on the house." I looked at him. "I can't accept that." "You're not accepting anything. I'm setting 2 items aside that I'm not putting on the bill. Different thing." He held my gaze for a moment, steady, the look of a man who has made a decision and is not interested in relitigating it. "Ruth Callaway let me use her truck for 6 months when mine was in the shop and I was between paychecks. Told me not to mention it. I've been not mentioning it for 20 years. He went back to the register. "Consider it a delayed return." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that would have been adequate, and I had learned early that inadequate words are worse than silence. I paid for the rest. As he was bagging everything, I asked the question I had been deciding whether to ask since I walked in. "Did you know about Hargrove, about what they were doing to her?" The motion of his hands did not stop, but something in his shoulders changed. "I knew she was being pressured to sell," he said. He did not look up from the bag. "Knew it was coming from outside the valley, some development outfit. Knew she wasn't going to." A pause. "Didn't know the particulars. She didn't share particulars." Another pause, this one longer. "When she left, when she was gone, I should have asked more questions, asked to see her, something. I told myself it wasn't my business." His hand stopped. He looked up. "It was my business." He said it the way a man says something he has been carrying for years. Not confessing, just setting it down in front of someone finally. "She made her choice," I said. "She didn't want you involved. She was protecting you too, probably." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he picked up the bag and set it on the counter. "You said you have a phone?" he asked. "A cheap one?" He wrote a number on a notepad and tore off the sheet. "That's mine. If something happens, if you see something that doesn't feel right." He pushed the paper across the counter. "You call." I took it. "Thank you, Mr. Briggs." "Garrett," he said. "Nobody in this county under the age of 60 calls me Mr. Briggs. Feels wrong." I almost smiled. It was a smaller almost than the one Jesse had pulled out of me, but it was there. I carried everything back to the cabin in 2 trips, the second one brutal with the weight of the camp supplies. By early afternoon, I had pried the boards off the front window with the crowbar, letting the first real light into the interior of the cabin since before I was born. The inside was a single room, smaller than it looked from outside, and covered in a decade of accumulated dust and leaf debris that had crept in through gaps in the walls and around the window boards. A stone fireplace on the north wall, the chimney intact as far as I could tell. A rough wooden table and 2 chairs in the center of the room, solid enough despite the dust. A cot frame in the corner, the mattress long since rotted to nothing. Some shelving, some hooks by the door where coats had once hung. I swept, I scrubbed, I knocked down cobwebs and cleared debris and opened the front door, which required the crowbar to break the swollen seal and move on its hinges, and I propped it wide and let the August air move through and took the accumulated darkness of a decade with it. It was not a home yet, but it was becoming what a home becomes before it is a home. By evening, I had the camp stove set up on the table and a meal of canned soup heating on it, and the lantern lit, and the sleeping bag laid out on the cleaned cot frame. It was still Spartan, but it was also, for the first time in my life, mine in a way that nothing had ever been mine. Then I opened the Hargrove envelope. I had been putting it off all day, using the work to put it off, which is a legitimate use of work. But the day was ending, and I needed to know what I was dealing with. The letterhead was embossed. 2 intertwined H's stylized the kind of design that costs money to produce. Beneath it, Hargrove Land Group. Property Development and Resource Management, Charleston, West Virginia. The letter was 3 paragraphs. The tone was pleasant, professionally warm, the tone of a letter that has been designed by lawyers to be readable as friendly, while meaning something else entirely. Paragraph 1 expressed condolences on the passing of Ruth Calloway and welcomed me to the Hollow Ridge community. Paragraph 2 noted that Hargrove Land Group had a long-standing interest in the Calloway property and given the challenging conditions of the structure and the limited development potential of the land, wished to offer me the sum of $15,000 for the property, all in which they characterized as generous given the market conditions and the cost of remediation. Paragraph 3 informed me that this offer would expire in 7 days. 7 days. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it along its original creases and set it back in the envelope, and set the envelope on the table under the lantern. $15,000. 1 week ago, that would have been an incomprehensible sum to me. It would have been life-changing in the specific way that a fixed amount of money is life-changing when you have never had any, a number with a horizon in it, a number that implies futures. I would have signed anything they put in front of me. They knew that. The timing was calculated. Get to her fast before she reads anything, before she understands, before she makes calls. Get her signature in the first week when she is still stunned and alone and has not yet developed any sense of what she has. They had been waiting for this. Since 2012, 12 years, they had been waiting for an 18-year-old girl with a duffel bag and no resources to walk into their timeline and sign her name on a line. I did not respond to the letter. 3 days later, I found Aldous Merritt's number in the envelope of documents Mrs. Harmon had given me, and I called it from the bottom of the Briarley Road path, the only spot where my phone found a consistent signal. His secretary was brief and uninviting. I said it was regarding the O'Connell estate. She said she would pass along the message. I said I had received an offer from Hargrove Land Group and had reason to believe the property's assessed value was significantly incorrect. There was a pause. Then she asked me to hold. Aldous Merritt came on the line 40 seconds later. He was in his late 50s, his voice the practiced, careful voice of a man who makes his living in language. He asked me to describe the offer. I read him the Hargrove letter. He was quiet for a moment. "How soon can you come to Charleston?" he asked. "How soon do you need me?" Tomorrow would not be too soon. I took the early bus. His office was on the 4th floor of a building in downtown Charleston that had the solid, slightly dated dignity of structures built in an era when professional permanence was expressed through architecture. The waiting room had wood paneling and framed certificates and the specific quiet of a place where serious things were handled with seriousness. His secretary looked at me and my duffel bag with the particular calibrated neutrality of someone trained to show nothing. Aldous Merritt himself came to the waiting room to get me, which I learned later was not his habit with new clients. He was a compact man with thinning brown hair going silver at the temples, and the kind of reading glasses that live on top of the head most of the time. He shook my hand with both of his in a way that communicated something deliberate. We sat across his desk. I took the document tube out of my bag and set it in front of him. I took out the Hargrove letter. I took out the deed and the first 2 of Ruth's letters, the parts I had decided he needed to read. He read everything. He was slow about it, the reading of a man who reads for precision rather than speed, going back to reread sections, making small marks on a legal pad. When he got to the Hargrove letter, he read it 3 times. Then he picked up his phone and called someone. "Bo," he said into the phone. "I need you in my office. Today, if possible." A pause. "I know. I understand. Bo, I'm asking you to come today." He listened for a moment. "Yes, that's serious. Thank you." He hung up and looked at me. "Dr. Bo Callender," he said. "Geologist. Used to run the Natural Resources Survey program at WVU. Retired 2 years ago and spends his time irritating his wife and cataloging rock formations in the New River Gorge. A brief pause that might have been almost a smile. He's also the best set of eyes in this state for what you've brought me. He'll be here in 2 hours. While we waited, Aldous asked me questions. Careful, thorough questions about the timeline of events, about what I had found in the trunk, about the condition of the property, about the Hargrove letter and its delivery. He wrote everything down in his precise handwriting. He asked about my financial situation without embarrassment, the matter-of-fact directness of a professional who needs information to do his job. I told him about the cash in the trunk. He nodded, made a note. "Do not deposit that money in any account yet," he said. "Leave it where it is until we understand the full legal landscape. Withdrawals and deposits leave trails, and right now I want your position to look exactly as ambiguous as possible to anyone watching." The idea that anyone might be watching had not fully formed in my mind until that moment. Dr. Bo Callender arrived at 3 p.m. He was a large man, broad and rumpled, with the kind of outdoor complexion that comes from 30 years of field work and the large square hands of someone who has spent those years handling rock. He came into Aldous' office with the slightly reluctant energy of a man who has been interrupted but has decided en route to be interested. Then he saw the document tube on the desk, and the reluctance fell away. He opened the tube himself, handling the paper with an expert's instinct, unrolling it with controlled pressure, reading the survey markings with his face close to the page. He said nothing for a long time. Then he asked to see the other tubes. I had not brought them all, but I had brought the one with the grid data. He spread it beside the topographic map and looked at both together, his eyes moving back and forth with the focused quality of a man translating between two languages he knew well. "Who did this work?" he asked. "My great-grandfather, Thomas Calloway. He was a geological engineer, graduated WVU 1947. Bo looked up from the maps. "I know that name," he said slowly. "Not personally. He was before my time. But there's a citation in the WVU Geological Survey archives, a technical paper on Appalachian spodumene occurrence patterns early 1970s. One of the authors, T.H. Calloway." He looked back at the map. "This is his—" "Yes." Bo was quiet for a long time. "This survey is consistent with a major spodumene lithium deposit," he said finally. "The grid pattern, the sample notations, the depth indicators. I would need to run independent core samples to confirm, but if this data is accurate—" He stopped. He looked at Aldous. "Aldous, if this data is accurate, we are looking at one of the most significant undiscovered lithium deposits in the eastern United States." The room was very quiet. "Estimated value?" Aldous asked. Bo shook his head slowly, not in denial, but in the way of a man for whom the numbers are too large to handle casually. "Mineral rights for a deposit this size? At current lithium spot prices, with the current demand trajectory for battery-grade lithium." He exhaled. "Conservatively, we are talking hundreds of millions of dollars. With the right development partner and the right market conditions." He set down the map. "Wren Hargrove offered you $15,000. In 7 days. Bo looked at Aldous. Aldous looked at Bo. "We need a litigator," Aldous said. He made another call. That was how I met Sloan Whitfield. She came the next morning, driving herself in a dark blue sedan, arriving exactly on time in a gray suit that looked like it had been selected for maximum credibility in a West Virginia courtroom. She was in her mid-40s with close-cropped dark hair and the particular focused stillness of someone who is always listening for what is not being said. She had spent 20 years doing nothing but mineral rights litigation in Appalachian states. Aldous described her briefly as the person Hargrove Land Group would least like to see across a courtroom. She described herself more briefly as someone who had watched coal companies, and now gas companies, and now development corporations come into these mountains and take what they wanted for 100 years, and who had chosen as a professional matter to be in the way. I liked her immediately. She read Ruth's letters, the Hargrove letter, the deed, and Beau's preliminary notes in under an hour. Then she asked me to tell her everything that had happened at the property in order from the moment I arrived. I told her. She asked questions at specific points, the questions of someone building a legal architecture figuring out where the load-bearing walls were. "They've done this before," she said when I finished. It was not a question. She looked at Aldous. "I know," Aldous said. "You know specifically, or you know generally?" "Specifically." Aldous opened a drawer and removed a folder. He set it on the desk between us. 3 other properties in the Hollow Ridge Valley, all sold to Hargrove subsidiaries in the last 5 years, all below market value. In each case, there were documented incidents in the period preceding the sale. One was a fire. One was a legal challenge to the property's title that turned out to have no basis. One was a vehicle accident involving the owner ruled inconclusive. He paused. The owner in that last case had refused 3 prior offers from Hargrove. I looked at the folder. I thought about Ruth's letters, about the cut fences and the tampered mail and Royce Dunham on the porch. "How long have you had this?" I asked. "I've been collecting it for 3 years," Aldous said quietly, "since I started seeing the pattern. I did not have standing to do anything with it. I did not have a client until you walked into this, too." He looked at me with the particular expression of a man who has been waiting for a thing and is not certain now that it has arrived, how he feels about it. "You have a client now," I said. That was the day we filed. Sloane moved fast the way she apparently always moved, with the focused velocity of someone who has learned that speed is its own kind of weapon. The lawsuit named Hargrove Land Group as defendant and alleged a pattern of harassment, intimidation, predatory acquisition practices, and fraud. Beau submitted a preliminary geological assessment to accompany the filing. Aldous paid the outstanding property taxes from a fund I authorized from the cash in the trunk 48 hours before the 90-day deadline. The land was mine. Legally, formally, unambiguously mine. I was back at the cabin when Sloane called to tell me it was filed. I was standing on the porch with a hammer and a box of nails fixing the sagging corner post. I had found the post was still sound at the base. It was the connection at the top that had failed. I had shimmed it back into position and was nailing the bracket when the phone rang. "It's done," Sloane said. "The county has the tax payment. The filing is in. Hargrove will be served within the week." "What happens then?" "Then they lawyer up and we start the real conversation, which will be unpleasant." A pause. "They will come at you directly, Wren. Not just legally. They have done it before. I want you to document everything. Any contact from Hargrove or anyone claiming to represent them, any unusual vehicles on or near the property, any incidents of any kind. Write it down with time and date. Photograph anything physical. Call me before you respond to anything they say." 3 days later, Royce Dunham came up the path. I saw him from the cabin. I had the front door open, the interior finally clear enough to work in, and I was pulling rotten floorboard sections near the east wall with the crowbar when I heard footsteps on the path, and I looked up, and there he was at the edge of the clearing. He was 48 years old and looked exactly like what he was. A man in an expensive coat standing in the wrong place with the wrong expression on his face, a smile that had been assembled carefully and did not reflect anything that was happening in his eyes. He was lean, with the kind of controlled fitness that reads as aggression, and he stood at the tree line the way a man stands when he has decided not to cross a line, but wants you to know he could. I stood up slowly. I picked up the crowbar not in any dramatic way, just in the way you pick up the tool you were using when you stood. I walked to the porch and stopped at the top of the steps. Royce looked at me, at the cabin, at the work I had clearly been doing, at the crowbar in my hand. His expression did not change, which was itself informative. "Wren Calloway," he said pleasantly. "I'm Royce Dunham, Hargrove Land Group. I wanted to introduce myself in person." I did not say anything. He continued. The voice was practiced the rhythm of someone who has given this speech many times and has calibrated its pressure to different audiences. He was sorry for my loss. He wanted me to know Hargrove was a community partner invested in the economic development of the valley. The offer he had extended was genuinely generous, given the market realities. He understood I had been speaking with an attorney, which was my right, but he wanted me to understand that litigation was expensive and slow, and the outcome was uncertain, and he hoped we could resolve this in a way that worked for both parties. Then he paused, and the tone shifted barely a degree or two, in a direction that would not be visible to a recording device, but was unmistakably visible to a person. "This is a lot of property for a young woman on her own," he said. "Remote area. Things happen out here. Accidents. Fires." He gestured vaguely toward the outbuilding whose collapsed remains were visible behind the cabin. "Hard to keep a place like this safe when you're the only one watching it." He was looking at me when he said it, and in his eyes was the same calculation that Ruth had described in his visit 12 years ago. The same assessment. I let him finish. Then I said, "My attorney's name is Sloan Whitfield. You've probably heard of her. All future communication goes through her office." I held his gaze. "This is private property. You are trespassing. If you come up this path again without an invitation, I will call the county sheriff, and I will also call the regional FBI field office in Charleston because my attorney has already been in contact with them, and they are aware of your company's history in this valley." The smile held for 2 seconds. Then it dropped, not dramatically, just stopped the way a performance stops when the audience leaves. What was underneath it was not anger. It was colder than that. It was the expression of a man recalculating. He turned and walked back down the path without another word. I stood on the porch until the sound of his footsteps was gone and the clearing was quiet again. Then I called Sloan. She listened to everything. She was quiet for a moment. "The reference to the outbuilding," she said. "I know. That is on the record now. I'm going to add it to the filing." Another pause. "Wren, tonight, sleep with your phone in your hand. Literally in your hand." I did. It was 3 nights later. I woke to the smell. Not smoke, not yet, but the smell that comes before smoke. The hot, resinous smell of wood being heated beyond its tolerance, the smell that precedes flame by just enough time to matter if you are paying attention. My eyes opened, and I was on my feet before I was fully conscious, because 12 years of institutional living had trained me to read changes in an environment before my higher brain could process them. I went to the back window. The outbuilding was on fire. Not the cabin. Not near the cabin. The collapsed outbuilding 30 feet back, already too far gone to have been an accident, burning with the particular purposefulness of something that was set rather than started. The flames were orange against the black of the tree line, the light of them reaching the back wall of the cabin in shifting living patterns. I grabbed my phone. I grabbed the document tube I kept inside with me at night. I went out the front door and around the south side of the cabin to where I could see the outbuilding burning and confirm it was not moving toward the main structure. It was not. It was burning fast, and it would burn itself out. There was nothing left to it that wasn't already gone. It was sending a message, not destroying an asset. This was the same grammar Hargrove had been using for 12 years. Small, targeted, deniable. I photographed it with the timestamp on. Then I called Garrett. He answered on the second ring, which told me he was a light sleeper, the sleep of someone who had learned to stay one level above rest. Fire, I said. The outbuilding. It's contained, but it was set. You don't have to come. He was there in 18 minutes. He came up the path with a flashlight and a shovel, and he went directly to the outbuilding and started turning over the burned perimeter, burying the edges methodical and unhurried, in the way of a man who has dealt with fires in rural places before. I stood nearby and held my light for him, and neither of us said anything for a long time. When the last edge was buried and the smoke had thinned to wisps, he straightened and looked at the remains. "They did this," he said. Not a question. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "My wife," he said. "Her name was Dorothy. She grew up 3 roads over from here. Used to come to the Calloway place with Ruth to pick blackberries when they were girls." He was looking at the ruins of the outbuilding, but I did not think he was seeing it. "She always said Ruth was the stubbornest person she'd ever met. Said it like a compliment." A pause. "Dorothy was right about most things." He looked at me. "They're not going to stop," he said. It was not a warning. It was just a statement of what he knew to be true, delivered without drama, the way the mountain men here delivered hard things straight and without apology. "I know," I said. "You stoppings." I looked at the ash and the blackened timber of the outbuilding, cooling now in the mountain dark. And beyond it, the tree line and the dark mountains against the darker sky. And I thought about Thomas Calloway driving his survey stakes into this ground 50 years ago, with the patience of a man who understood that what matters is not the moment of discovery, but the decision of what to do with it. "No," I said. Garrett nodded once. He stayed until the sky began to pale in the east. We did not talk much. There was not much that needed to be said. He drove back to town when the light came. I went back inside. I made coffee on the camp stove. I sat at the table where Ruth had once sat, and I opened her 4th letter, and I read it in the growing light. And at the bottom of the page, almost like an afterthought, she had written, "If they push hard enough that you feel like you're losing, there is one more thing. Look for Clement Parrish. He lives in Morgantown. He is a retired judge. He will know your name. I made sure of it. I set the letter down. I looked at the iron key on the table next to the camp lantern next to the folded Hargrove letter, with its embossed double H. I picked up my phone. I found Sloane's number. "I have a name," I said when she answered. "Clement Parrish, retired Judge Morgantown." My grandmother said he'd know my name. There was a brief pause. "I'll find him," Sloane said. "Don't do anything until you hear from me." Outside the mountain, morning was establishing itself with its usual indifference to what was happening in the small lives below the tree line. The creek ran. The birds started. The light came. I finished my coffee. Then I picked up the crowbar and went back to work on the floor. Sloane found Clement Parrish in 4 hours. She called me back that same afternoon while I was on the porch pulling nails from a section of rotten fascia board, the work that gives your hands something to do while your mind works on other things. She had his address in Morgantown, his phone number, and a brief biography that she delivered in the efficient sequential way she delivered all information as if she were reading from a case file she had already organized in her head. Clement Parrish, 76 years old, retired Circuit Court Judge, Monongalia County. 31 years on the bench, the last 12 as Chief Judge before his retirement in 2018. Reputation, rigorous, impartial, occasionally difficult to the point of being described by opposing counsel in various depositions as, and here, Sloane's voice carried a note that was almost appreciation obstinate. "He retired clean," she said. "No complaints, no misconduct findings, no ties to any development interests in the state, which in West Virginia judiciary circles is rarer than you would think." A pause. "He also, interestingly, has no recorded professional connection to Hargrove Land Group or any of its subsidiaries, which means if your grandmother pointed you toward him, it is not because he is part of the problem." "She said he would know my name," I said. "Then I think you should go hear what he has to say." I took the bus to Morgantown 2 days later on a Thursday morning that had turned cold overnight, the first real cold of the season, the kind that comes into the mountains early and means what it says. The trees along the highway were beginning to turn the first yellows and oranges appearing in the crowns of the hardwoods like small fires, and the sky was the deep washed blue that comes after the first cold front moves through and leaves the air clear and sharp as glass. Clement Parrish lived in a house on a quiet street in a residential neighborhood south of the university campus, a 2-story brick colonial with a covered porch and a yard full of old maples that had already committed fully to autumn, their leaves coming down in slow, steady falls that covered the walkway and the porch steps in overlapping layers of red and gold. The house had the particular quality of a place inhabited for a long time by the same person, every element settled into its permanent relationship with every other element. I rang the bell. He answered the door himself. He was a tall man, still carrying the height well, despite his years, with white hair cut short, and a face that had the deep, settled lines of someone who had spent decades listening to hard things and thinking carefully before speaking. He wore a flannel shirt and reading glasses pushed up on his head, and he held a book in his left hand, a finger marking his place with the instinctive grip of someone for whom the idea of losing a page was genuinely unacceptable. He looked at me, and his expression did something I had not expected. It did not show surprise. It showed recognition. "Wren Calloway," he said. "Not a question, a statement. The statement of a man who has been expecting someone and is confirming that the person who arrived is who he expected." "Yes, sir," I said. He stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. "I've had coffee on since 8. I thought you might come this week. I followed him into a study lined floor to ceiling with books and case reports and the accumulated paper of a long professional life, organized into a system that was clearly intelligible to its creator and perhaps to no one else. He poured 2 cups of coffee without asking how I took mine, set them on the desk, and sat across from me in the manner of a man resuming a conversation that had been briefly interrupted. "Your grandmother called me," he said, "in the spring of 2022, 2 months before she died." He picked up his coffee. "She told me she was ill. She told me she had arranged for her property to go to her granddaughter in trust until the granddaughter turned 18. She told me she believed Hargrove Land Group would attempt to acquire the property by whatever means available to them once the granddaughter appeared, and that she needed someone outside the immediate legal chain to hold a specific piece of information." He reached into the desk drawer and removed a folder. He set it on the desk between us without opening it. "In 2008, he said, Ruth Calloway came to my office. I was not yet retired. She had been referred to me by a colleague who knew I handled complex property matters on occasion in addition to my judicial duties. She told me she had reason to believe her property would face legal challenge at some point in the future, possibly after her death, and she wanted to take a precautionary step." He opened the folder. Inside was a single document, several pages, the paper thick and official, bound with a county seal. He turned it to face me. "She registered the mineral rights of her property separately from the surface title," he said, "under a different legal mechanism than the standard deed. The mineral rights were assigned in perpetuity to a named beneficiary. The beneficiary is identified by full legal birth name, not common name." He looked at me. "Do you know your full legal birth name, Wren?" I had seen it exactly once on the Cedar Brook discharge paperwork. It had surprised me then because no one had ever used it. "Wren Eleanor Ruth Calloway," I said. He nodded. "Ruth chose your middle names deliberately. Eleanor and Ruth, her own name and her mother's. She said she wanted your name to be a document in itself." He looked back at the folder. "The mineral rights registration names Wren Eleanor Ruth Calloway as sole beneficiary. Not Ruth Calloway, not the estate of Ruth Calloway. You specifically by your full legal name." He paused. "The registration was completed in October 2008. It is a matter of county record filed with the Mineral County Assessor's Office in a routine administrative batch. Nothing about it was unusual enough to draw attention. It has been sitting in the county records for 16 years. I looked at the document, at the date. October 2008, 2 years after I was born. 4 years before Ruth put me in the system. 10 years before Hargrove's campaign of pressure reached its peak. 16 years before I sat in the study with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. Ruth had been planning this since I was 2 years old. "Hargrove submitted a document to the court," I said carefully. "A signed agreement, allegedly Ruth's signature, dated March 2022, claiming she agreed to sell the property." Clement Parrish looked at me with the expression of a man who has anticipated exactly this. "March 2022, he said. 2 months before she called me. 3 months before she died." He picked up the mineral rights registration and turned to the last page where the legal description of the rights was formally enumerated. "This document, registered in 2008, conveys the mineral rights to Wren Eleanor Ruth Calloway in a manner that is irrevocable and independent of any subsequent surface title transaction." He set it down. "Which means that even if Ruth had signed a legitimate sale agreement for the surface property in March 2022, she could not have transferred the mineral rights. They were no longer hers to transfer. They had belonged to you since 2008. The room was very quiet. Outside, a maple leaf came down past the study window, slow and turning in the still air, red as a coal. Any document purporting to convey full title, including mineral rights bearing Ruth's signature from March 2022, is legally void on its face. Clement said, because it purports to transfer something she did not possess. Regardless of whether the signature is genuine or forged, the document cannot accomplish what it claims to accomplish. I sat with that for a moment. But the forgery still matters, I said. Yes, he said. The forgery matters considerably. If the signature is forged, and you believe it is, that is a separate and serious criminal matter. But the mineral rights question is independent of it. The mineral rights were yours before Ruth died. Hargrove's entire legal strategy, whatever form it takes, founders on that single fact. He folded his hands on the desk. Your grandmother was a very careful woman, Wren. I know, I said. I'm still learning how careful. He kept the original registration document. He gave me certified copies, 3 of them each, bearing the county seal and his own notarization. He also gave me a signed affidavit describing Ruth's visit to his office in 2008 and the conversation in 2022, both recorded in his personal case notes, which he had maintained throughout his retirement with the same rigor he had brought to his judicial record. When I left, he walked me to the door. He stood on the porch among the falling maple leaves and looked at me with the particular expression I had come to recognize in the faces of people who had known Ruth. She was right about you, he said. She didn't know me, I said. Not really. Not past the age of 6. No, he agreed. But she knew what she came from, and she believed that was enough to go on. He paused. She was right. I took the bus back to Hollow Ridge in the early evening, watching the mountains go dark as the sun dropped, holding the folder of certified documents in both hands in my lap. The way you hold something irreplaceable. When I got back to the cabin, I went down to the cellar, and I sat on the earthen floor, and I read the remaining letters. All of them. 8 through 12. The ones I had saved, the ones I had been rationing, without quite admitting to myself that I was rationing them, because reading them meant using them up. The letters got shorter as the years went on, not because Ruth had less to say, but because I understood reading them, she had less energy. The illness that would take her had begun. She mentioned in letter 10 to make certain things difficult. She did not dwell on it. She mentioned it the way she mentioned the weather, as a condition to be noted and accounted for and worked around. Letter 11 was brief. 2 paragraphs. The handwriting was the same, but required more effort. The letters formed with a deliberateness that suggested each one had been a small act of will. Wren, if you have needed Clement Parrish, then you are deep in the fight now. Good. Being deep in the fight means you did not run. I never thought you would run, but I am glad to be right. There is one more thing I want you to know. Not about the land, about you. I watched you every day for 6 years. I watched the way you paid attention, the way you were careful with small things, the way you would go quiet and still when something important was happening, and look and think before you acted. You were 6 years old, and you were already more deliberate than most adults I have known. I don't know what the years in between have made of you, but I know what you started with, And I know that whatever they tried to make you believe about yourself in those years, whatever story you told yourself to survive the truth of what you are, is in your blood and in your bones, and no institution and no corporation and no man in an expensive coat can touch it. Be well, my wren. I read letter 12 by the lantern light, sitting on the cold floor of the cellar my great-grandfather had built with his own hands in the mountain summer of 1968, under the floorboards of the house he had built above it, on the land that had held its secret in the dark for 50 years. The letter was one paragraph, undated. The handwriting was Ruth's, but had changed, simplified the way things simplify at the end, when complexity becomes a luxury. I don't know how strong you are. I only know what you come from. Callaway ground doesn't get taken. It gets passed on. I'm passing it to you now. Everything that's mine is yours. Everything I couldn't finish is yours to finish. I love you without condition or reservation or end. Ruth. I sat there for a long time after, not crying. Past crying, the way you get past it, when you have cried enough that the grief has shifted into something else, something quieter and more permanent, something you carry differently. Then I climbed the stairs, locked the cellar door behind me, and called Sloan. The court date was set for the 3rd week of October. The 3 weeks between that phone call and the hearing were the longest of my life, and I filled every hour of them with work, because the work was the thing I could control. And I had learned in 18 years of having very little agency over very much to apply maximum force to the things within reach. I finished the floor. I patched the roof with help from Garrett, who appeared one Saturday morning with a truck full of roofing materials and a taciturn competence with heights that suggested this was not his first time working 40 feet off the ground on an aging structure. We worked side by side for 2 days without much conversation, which was its own kind of conversation. The ridge was sound beneath the damaged section. The rafters needed 2 sister boards on the west end, and that was all. When we were done, the cabin no longer leaked. Sloan and Aldous visited the property once during those 3 weeks walking the land with Beau Callender, who took his own core samples at the survey points Thomas had marked 50 years earlier. Beau moved across the land with the focused quiet of a man doing work he loves. His equipment pack on his back, his sampling tool going into the earth at each marked point with the precision of long practice. He did not speak much while he worked. When he was done, he stood at the edge of the clearing and looked back at the cabin and then at the hillside above it, and his expression was that of a man looking at something that has been waiting patiently for a very long time. "Your great-grandfather was right," he said to me, "about all of it. The deposit, the extent, the depth. He was right about every number." He shook his head slowly. He surveyed this in 1971 with equipment that would be primitive by current standards, working alone on his own land over what must have been years of careful work. And he was right. I thought of Thomas Callaway with his engineer's hands and his geologist's patience driving his stakes into the Callaway ground decade by decade, recording what he found with the discipline of a man who knew that what you record outlasts what you remember. I thought of all the things that had been laid in the dark of that cellar and left there to wait for someone who was not yet born. I thought about what it means to prepare something for a person you will never meet. The day before the hearing, Hargrove's attorneys filed a supplemental motion. I was at the cabin when Sloan called to tell me about it. I was at the table eating soup, and I set the spoon down and listened. They had located the signed agreement. Ruth Calloway's signature, March 2022, agreeing to sell the property for $8,000. They were submitting it as evidence of prior consent to transfer, arguing that the trust and the subsequent bequest to me were superseded by Ruth's expressed intent to sell in the final months of her life. "They're playing their last card," Sloan said. Her voice was level, the level of someone who is not surprised. "They've had this document for a while, and they've been deciding when to use it. They chose the day before the hearing to maximize the disruption and minimize our time to respond." "Can they do that?" "Procedurally, it's aggressive. The judge may not like it, but it's legal." A pause. "Wren, we have the mineral rights registration. That document is still void on its face regardless of whether that signature is legitimate. But if the signature is forged, we can pursue criminal referral. It changes the entire landscape." "It's forged," I said. "You sound certain." I was certain. I had read every letter Ruth had ever written me. I had traced her signature until I knew it better than my own. I had thought about it for 3 weeks, turning it in my head, and the moment Sloan had described the document, I had known the thing that would be true of it. "She was left-handed," I said. "Always." It was the most consistent physical fact about her. Every signature in every letter is left-handed. The letter formation, the pressure pattern, the angle of the ascenders. You can see it clearly when you look for it. If that document was signed by Ruth Calloway, it was signed left-handed. A silence. "Send me one of the letters," Sloan said. A clear photograph of the signature page. Tonight. I photographed 3 of them and sent them. Sloan had a forensic document examiner retained by morning. The courtroom was small and functional, the kind of space where the architecture communicated that the proceedings were serious without being important enough for grandeur. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lighting, the smell of old paper and floor wax. A gallery of perhaps 40 seats half filled when we arrived. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Sloan on my left and Aldous on my right. The certified copies from Clement Parish and Beau Callender's independent geological assessment and the forensic document examiner's preliminary report, all organized in front of me in a folder Sloan had assembled with the meticulous precision she brought to everything. Hargrove's legal team was 3 attorneys at the defendant's table, all suited, all projecting the particular studied calm of people who are accustomed to winning. The lead attorney was a man named Birch, older, silver-haired, the kind of presence that takes up space in a room without requiring volume. In the gallery, in the 3rd row, on the left side, Garrett Briggs sat in a dark jacket that I suspected he had not worn in some years, given the way it fit him. He had not told me he was coming. He had not asked if he could. He had driven 40 miles from Hollow Ridge on a Thursday morning and sat down in the 3rd row and folded his hands in his lap and looked straight ahead. And when I turned and saw him before the proceeding started, he gave me a single nod, the minimal acknowledgement of a man who did not deal in demonstrations. It was enough. The hearing went for most of the morning. The judge was a woman in her 50s with the compressed efficiency of someone who had been watching lawyers perform in her courtroom for long enough to have calibrated her tolerance for theater to a fine edge. She let both sides speak. She asked questions that were precise and occasionally uncomfortable. She read documents herself rather than accepting counsel's characterization of them. Sloan presented the mineral rights registration first. She walked the judge through the timeline, the 2008 filing date, the full legal name, the irrevocability clause, the legal consequence for any subsequent transfer instrument. The judge read the document. She asked 2 questions. She made notes. Birch objected on several grounds. The judge overruled all of them. Then, Sloan presented Bo Callender's geological assessment. Bo testified briefly in the direct, non-theatrical manner of a scientist who has spent his life explaining technical things to non-technical people and has learned to do it without condescension. He established the nature and extent of the deposit. He established the current market value of similar mineral rights. He established that the figure was not in the hundreds of thousands, but in the hundreds of millions. The number settled into the room like a change in air pressure. Birch cross-examined Bo on his methodology and the age of the underlying survey data. Bo answered every question with the patient-specific accuracy of a man who knew what he knew and was not troubled by the questions. Then Birch presented the signed agreement. He made his case carefully with the skill of a practiced courtroom lawyer. The document was genuine, he argued. The signature had been obtained in the final months of Ruth Calloway's life when she had reconsidered her position on the property, as people do when facing mortality. The trust and the bequest did not override a signed agreement executed during the grantor's lifetime. The mineral rights registration was a clerical matter that did not supersede expressed intent. He was good. I will give him that. He constructed his argument with the precision of someone who had been building it for a long time. When he finished, Sloan stood. She presented Clement Parrish's affidavit first. The judge read it. The date of Ruth's visit to Clement's office in 2008. The conversation in 2022. The specific documented reason for the registration. The judge's expression did not change, but her pen moved on her notepad. Then Sloan set 3 photographs on the table, enlarged printed clearly on photo paper, each one mounted on cardboard for clarity. The first photograph was a signature page from one of Ruth's letters to me. Ruth's signature, clear and unmistakable, the slanted left-handed script I knew better than my own face, the particular pressure pattern and angle that belonged to a woman who had written her name 10,000 times with her left hand and never thought about it. The second photograph was the signature from a second letter. Same hand, same angle, same pressure, consistent. The third photograph was the signature from the document Hargrove had submitted. Ruth Eleanor Calloway, March 15th, 2022, right-handed. Sloan did not narrate the photographs extensively. She did not need to. She said, "The plaintiff submits for the court's examination 3 signature samples. The first 2 are drawn from correspondence bearing Ruth Calloway's signature, authenticated by a forensic document examiner retained by the plaintiff. The third is drawn from the agreement submitted by the defendant. The examiner's report, which the plaintiff submitted this morning, establishes that the first 2 samples are consistent with left-handed authorship throughout, and that the third is inconsistent with left-handed authorship in multiple identified characteristics." She set down the report. Ruth Calloway was left-handed. Every documented signature she produced in her adult life was left-handed. The signature on the defendant's agreement was not. The room was very quiet. Birch stood. He objected. He cited the preliminary nature of the forensic report, the short timeline, the insufficiency of the sample. The judge looked at the photographs for a long time, all 3 of them side by side. She did not rule from the bench. She was too careful for that, too precise, and the matter was genuinely complex in its multiple dimensions. She took the case under advisement and said she would issue a written ruling within 2 weeks. But she looked at Hargrove's table when she said it. And what was in her look was not the neutral impartiality of a jurist reserving judgment. It was something more specific. Something I recognized from the faces of people who have seen a long wrong and are deciding what to do about it. We walked out of the courthouse into the October afternoon, and the air was cold and clear, and the sky was the color of deep water, and the maple trees along the courthouse steps were burning red and gold against it. Aldous shook my hand. Sloane did not shake my hand. She put one hand briefly on my shoulder, the gesture of someone who does not deal in demonstrations, but is making an exception. And then she began talking about the referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the forgery matter, which she had already initiated, and the SEC complaint regarding the misrepresentation in Hargrove's parent company's IPO documentation, which was already drafted. I let her talk. She was good at this, and it mattered, and she deserved the space to be good at it. But I was looking at the mountains to the west, visible above the courthouse roof. The long blue ridgeline of the Appalachians going south and north as far as I could see, old and patient and indifferent to what had just happened in the room below them. The same mountains Thomas Calloway had looked at when he drove his stakes into the Calloway ground. The same mountains Ruth had looked at when she made her terrible choice on a spring morning in 2012. The same mountains that had been standing over all of this, the long quiet and the long secret and the long wait since before anyone in this story had been alive. Garrett was beside me when the others had moved away down the steps. He stood there for a moment, both of us looking west. "Good day," he said. "Yes," I said. A pause. He had his hands in the pockets of the dark jacket which he wore without particular comfort, but also without complaint. He was looking at the mountains. He looked at them the way men look at things they have looked at their whole lives, with the absence of novelty and the presence of something else, something deeper than novelty. The relationship with a thing that has always been there. "Dorothy would have liked you," he said. It was quiet, not offered as a compliment, exactly more as a fact he had arrived at and decided to say aloud. I did not know what to say to that. I said thank you because there was no better word. He nodded. He said he was going to get a cup of coffee before the drive back, and did I want one? I said yes. We walked down the courthouse steps together into the cold October afternoon, and that was that. The judge's ruling came 11 days later. Sloane called me at the cabin where I was stacking firewood in the space between the east wall and the cedar trees, the physical labor of preparation for winter. I intended to spend here on this land, in this place. The wood was good split dry oak that Garrett had sourced from a man 2 roads over who sold it by the cord and had delivered it that morning in a truck older than I was. The ruling was 22 pages. Sloane summarized it in 4 minutes with the efficiency of someone who has been reading judicial rulings for 20 years. The mineral rights registration was upheld as valid and controlling. The Hargrove Agreement was found void on its face for purporting to transfer rights the grantor did not possess at the time of signing, and the court further noted in language that Sloane described as unusually pointed for civil proceedings that the forensic evidence regarding the signature strongly suggested the document's authenticity was in material question, a matter she was formally referring to the West Virginia Attorney General and the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of West Virginia. The surface property was confirmed as mine by uncontested inheritance. All Hargrove's claims were denied. I sat on the stack of firewood and listened to Sloane finish the summary, and then I sat there for a while after she stopped talking. "It's over?" I asked. "The civil matter is over," Sloane said. "The criminal investigation is just starting. The SEC inquiry is just starting. The IPO is already in trouble. Sentinel Resources filed a delay notice last week, and their stock is down 18%. This is going to be a long unwinding." A pause. "But your land is your land. That part is finished." "My land." I said the words in my head and felt how they sat there. Not like something new, like something returned. 6 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in late November, when the first real snow had come to Hollow Ridge and the clearing was white and still, and the cedar trees were dusted silver at their tips, and the cabin's smoke rose straight up in the cold air because there was no wind, I sat at the table by the window and opened the last letter. Not Ruth's last letter. I had read that one in the cellar weeks ago. This was the last letter I had saved, letter 12, which I had carried from the cellar and brought upstairs and set on the table the day of the ruling, and not yet read, saving it for the moment that felt like the right moment. The snow outside came down in small, dry flakes, the kind that accumulate slowly and completely changing the shape of everything they settle on. The letter was brief. 1 page. The handwriting was Ruth's, but had the quality of the later letters, each word formed with intention, the handwriting of someone for whom writing had become an effort, and who had decided the effort was worth making. "Wren, I have been writing you letters for 12 years. I have had a lot to say, and not enough space to say all of it. But this is the last one, and I find that I don't have as much to say as I thought I would. I don't know how the fight turned out. I don't know if you won. I don't know if the ground is still yours, or if they found a way to take it in the end. I know I gave you everything I had to fight with, and I know you are a Calloway, and I know what Calloways do with their backs against the wall. But here is the thing I most want you to know, and it has nothing to do with the land, or the money, or the men in expensive coats. You were worth every choice I made, every one. I love you, Wren, Eleanor, Ruth Calloway. I love you without condition or reservation or end. Come home. Ruth." The snow came down outside. The fire in the stone fireplace that Thomas had built and Ruth had kept, and that I had cleaned and rebuilt and lit for the first time that autumn, made its small, steady sounds behind me. The cabin around me was not what it had been when I arrived. The floor was sound. The roof was sealed. The window glass was new, clear enough to see the snow falling through without the distortion of old glazing. The shelves were stocked. The wood pile outside was 3 cords deep against the east wall and covered with a tarp ready. It was not a grand house. It would never be a grand house. It was 400 square feet of fitted stone and hand-cut timber on a 1/4 acre in the West Virginia mountains, built by a man with an engineer's hands and a geologist's patience, and left to outlast him and his daughter, and be found by a girl in worn-out boots with a canvas duffel bag and $73. It was home. I sat there by the window and I watched the snow cover the clearing, covering the weeds and the stone path, and the place where the outbuilding had been smoothing everything into the same white stillness, the same clean surface. And I thought about what it means to inherit something. Not the money, not the mineral rights, or the geological surveys, or the legal documentation that Sloan was still working through in an office in Charleston. Not the numbers which were large enough to be difficult to hold in the imagination as anything other than abstraction, and which I had already begun with Aldous and a financial advisor he trusted to think about carefully and practically, and without sentimentality, because that was what Ruth had prepared me for. Not the wealth, but the responsibility of it. The obligation to use it in a way that honored the long patience of the people who had kept it. There would be an agreement with a development partner eventually, one who could be held to the conditions I intended to insist on. Environmental standards, employment commitments to Hollow Ridge and the surrounding communities, a trust funded from the mineral royalties for the valley, for the schools, for the things that small forgotten places need and never get, because no one with money has ever thought they were worth investing in. That was what I was going to do with it. Not because it was the optimal financial decision, because it was the right one. Because Thomas Calloway had known what the coal companies did to mountains and had chosen differently, and Ruth had known what Hargrove would do and had prepared for it over decades, and the least I could do with what they had left me was make a choice that was equal to theirs. Outside, the snow was deep enough now to smooth the clearing into a single white surface, and the cedar trees at the tree line were dark against the white, and the sky above them was the low gray of a full snowfall. And the whole world visible from the cabin window was quiet and still and patient in the way of things that have been waiting for a long time and have finally arrived somewhere. There was a knock at the cabin door. Garrett Briggs stood on the porch with snow on his shoulders and a covered dish in both hands and the slightly uncomfortable expression of a man who has shown up somewhere without being certain he should have. "Daughter-in-law made a pot roast," he said. "Made too much. Tends to do that." He held out the dish. "Thought you might not have had a proper meal today." I opened the door wider. "Come in," I said. "I'll make coffee." He came in stomping snow from his boots on the threshold, the way you do in a house where you have been taught to respect the floors. He set the dish on the table and looked around at the cabin with the particular look of a man seeing something he has known in one form for a long time and is now seeing changed. He looked at the fire, at the new floor, at the window with its clear glass, at the shelves stocked and organized, at the iron key hanging on a nail beside the door where I had put it on the day I moved in for good, the day I unpacked the duffel bag for the last time and put everything in it away. He looked at all of it for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, in the voice of a man who has measured his words for 65 years and does not spend them carelessly, "Your grandmother would be proud of you." The snow came down outside. The fire made its small, steady sounds. I thought of Ruth at her table in this room in the years before everything writing in her left-handed script planning, with a patience longer than anything I could fully comprehend. Loving, with a fierceness that had outlasted her absence and her death, and 12 years of silence, and a locked cellar, and a sealed trunk, and a single iron key passed from her hands to mine across the years. I thought of Thomas in his field with his survey stakes, and his patient instruments, recording what the earth was made of with the discipline of someone who knew that what you record outlasts what you remember. I thought of myself 6 years old, not knowing yet what I was being saved from, or what I was being saved for. not knowing that the woman who handed me to a stranger in a county building was doing the hardest thing that love can require, which is to let go of what you love most in order to protect it. I thought of the key in my hand on the morning I left Cedar Brook. The weight of it, how it had felt like a question. Now I knew the answer. "Sit down, Garrett," I said. "The coffee's almost ready." Outside over the Callaway ground, the snow came down, covering everything equally the way snow does, the way time does, leaving the surface clean and the deep things where they are held safe in the dark, waiting to be found by the right hands.